Hey friends, welcome back. So question 3, what I did was consolidate several questions together. I had 2 or 3 questions relative to iron play, and I had a couple questions relative to hitting a driver. Also had some questions about ball position and setup, and I'm just going to encompass all of these into one video. And basically the question is this: what's the difference between hitting a driver and an iron? Okay, differences between hitting a driver and hitting an iron. So first of all, the two pieces of equipment, one being a driver, one being an iron, they couldn't be more different. Okay, they're two different types of tools. It would be like using a hammer the same way that you use a screwdriver. They're not interchangeable. They're completely different tools. They're meant to be used completely differently. An iron is more of a downward strike. The driver is more of an upward strike. So this idea of low point that we talk a lot about, it changes, okay? And it changes relative to what position. So we're going to start with the iron first of all. We'll talk about driver here in a second. Let's talk about ball position with our irons. Here's the way I teach it. Everyone has different methods. For me, I think this is by far the most easy way to teach it. And the way I go is right now I have a pitching wedge. And I've got the ball position. You can see this orange alignment rod is right between my feet, and I've got the ball right on that line, okay? Get that tee out of the way. If I have a pitching wedge, I want your feet to be about shoulder if the outside of our feet is about the same as the outside of our shoulders, okay? So this may feel a little bit narrow to some of you because most people are too wide with their pitching wedges and their 9-irons and their sand wedges. So with a short club, a shorter iron, I'll say pitching wedge down. I want your feet to be relatively narrow, okay? Now, if I were to exchange that for a 7-iron, so this was my pitching wedge, here's what I'm going to do. With my 7-iron, all I'm going to do is take my trail foot and I'm going to get a little bit wider, okay? So I went from here, ball position right in the middle. All I did was get a little bit wider. Now the perception of where the ball is where? It's a little bit more forward. It's about where my shirt logo would be. My Twin Lakes logo, you probably can't see it, but it's right there, okay? If I were to exchange that iron for my 5-iron, okay, here was my pitching wedge. Here was my 7-iron. Now I have a 5-iron. I'm a little bit wider, okay? Ball never moved. All I did was move my trail foot, okay? So now it certainly has the perception that that is towards my front heel. Pitching wedge, 7-iron, 5-iron, okay? Now let's talk about feet width. Actually, we just did, right? I let ball position be dictated just with how wide I get. Most people start too wide initially, so their pitching wedge, they're way too wide, and that causes issues that we won't get into, okay? Something that's very important that's overlooked a lot is spine tilt. Now what is spine tilt? It's really where my spine is relative to my setup, okay? On my pitching wedge, my spine is pretty much straight up and down. Once I get into that 5-iron, you'll notice that I have a little bit more spine tilt, or this right side crunch. Can you see that? Boom. As opposed to pitching wedge, I'm straight up and down. Okay? That's very important once we start talking about the driver here in a minute. So my shorter irons, pitching wedge, my gap wedge, my sand wedges, spine tilts up. As I get longer through the bag, my foot goes back, my spine tilts right. Right side crunch. That's what we see on TV all the time. Boom. Okay, let's talk about the driver. How do we set up to the driver? We've already said pitching wedge, 7-iron, 5-iron or hybrid, okay? Now, let's talk about the driver. It's a completely different animal. It's much longer, okay? So we have to be further away from the golf ball. That's just common sense. As far as ball position is concerned, I'm going to teach it the same way. If you were to start out with the ball in the middle of your feet, represented by that orange alignment rod, okay, that would be my pitching wedge. I know I want to be wider and more athletic with the driver, so here's all I'm going to do. I'm going to take that trail foot and really widen it, okay? Now I'm outside shoulder width. I'm wider than my shoulders right now, okay? Look what it did to my ball position. It looked as though my ball really moved forward, but it didn't. The perception of it did, okay? So ball position is much more forward. Again, it's probably more left elbow or left armpit, okay? So I'm wider, which causes the ball position to be forward. Now, very important, this idea of spine tilt. Let's talk about it. This is an upward strike. We're going to get to that later, but when we get wider, okay, my right hand is below my left, so doesn't it make sense that my shoulder should tilt, okay? And the way in which we tilt these shoulders is not through a bump of the hip so much. All it is just a falling down, reaching underneath, feeling like your right goes way underneath your left. So now your address position is more like this, okay, which your shoulders are hitting up, or your spine is tilting back, okay? To me, this feels subtle. To you, it may feel very drastic, because probably what you're doing with your driver is your ball position is too neutral, which means your shoulders are too square, which causes you to steep over the top, and you have a downward strike with your driver, okay? We'll talk about that later. That's all no good. Got to get you wider, ball position up, shoulders back, spine tilt slightly to the right. That's your setup for your driver. So, basic concepts now when we're talking about golf swing and how we approach hitting a ball with an iron versus a driver. So we're going to start with an iron first. Now, the two are completely different. Let's talk about the differences. Number one, that ball's going to be sitting on the ground, and a driver, it's going to be elevated off of a tee. A big difference there. Number two, the whole idea behind a golf ball being struck with an iron is that I need to hit down. This club shaft, club head needs to be traveling on a downward angle and hit the golf ball first, and then your low point or your divot needs to be out in front or the target side. And a driver, you would actually be hitting up, where your low point would be somewhere behind the ball because the tee's elevated and we're hitting it up. So those are two huge differences, and you have to think that way. So let's think about this iron again. In this case, I have a pitching wedge. I said earlier, I want to be more narrow. Ball positions in the middle. As I come down, my number one goal is to make sure that this club head is on a downward fashion, and we hit the golf ball first. Low point or divot or disruption is left. Okay, so in swing concepts with the driver, most changes, a lot of people think big time difference between the driver swing and an iron swing. Not true. Most changes are done just in your setup. We've already talked about it. When we're hitting a driver, we now have permission to put it on a tee and tee that thing way up. Now the difference being, Our goal with an iron is we want to, since it's on the ground, we want a descending blow. Now with a driver, big setup changes, much wider, spine tilt back, ball position forward based on how far that foot is behind the ball. Now there are the changes. Now from here, completely different tool. Okay, less loft, much longer. This club is designed to hit up. Now, we don't have to swing differently. We are now, with our ball position being so far forward, that will promote an upward strike unless, and I want you to pay attention to this, this is what most people do with their drivers. Their shoulders, their right shoulder gets too high, they come over the top, and it's a very descending blow, so the driver is coming down, okay? Couldn't be more wrong, okay? Doesn't matter how hard you swing, if your driver is traveling down, descending into the golf ball, you're losing distance. You're spinning it way too much, you're hitting it too high, and it doesn't matter if you have 4 degrees loft on your driver, which they don't make, but even if you do, if you come steep and hit down on it, the ball's still gonna go up because you're putting backspin on a driver. Couldn't be more wrong. We want to be traveling up, taking spin away, and that's where this whole idea of smash factor comes in. We can actually slow your club head speed down and increase your ball speed, meaning you can hit it further. So, if this idea of hitting up does not make sense to you, it needs to. Right shoulder down, ball position up, low point would be here, and we are traveling and hitting up into that golf ball. Those are the main differences. So let's take a look at this 8-iron swing. You can clearly see my feet are close together. My shoulders are more parallel to the ground into a descending blow into impact. Nice balanced finish position. As opposed to my driver, you can clearly see my feet are further apart. As I attack the ball, it's on the way up. Here you can clearly see my right shoulder is well below my left at impact. Into a nice square finish position. So in conclusion, if you're a golfer that has 2 separate swing thoughts, one for the driver and one for the irons, I believe that's completely flawed. Listen, you've got one golf swing. Your in-swing components should not be different. Your setup should be vastly different, and you need to know the difference between the two. Irons, it's a tool that's designed to hit down, so our ball position is further back, which allows us and promotes a downward strike. The driver, because it's further up, because my trail foot is further back, more spine tilt allows us to hit up. So now we have an ascending blow. If you're a person that with the driver hits down on it, number one, you're spinning the ball way too much, which takes away distance. You're going to be hitting really low poles sometimes and really high right shots sometimes, okay? But it won't be as efficient. If we can get you into more of an upward strike or a more level strike, it's proven through smash factor that we can gain 25 or 30 yards instantly, and we don't even have to swing harder. Just basic ball flight laws. So give those concepts some thought. If you have more questions, let me know. KeithleyBoys@pga.com is where you're sending the questions. Keep them coming. And as always, one day closer to being on the other side of this disaster that we're living through. Hopefully, I can stop these indoor videos and get outside and work with some of you. So stay strong, stay healthy. We'll see you real soon.